You've often heard me complain about the introduction of 20-mile-an-hour speed limits here, there, and everywhere, and what a nuisance they can be to motorists. Well, I get to an extent in certain residential areas that maybe it might be a necessity because of safety issues. You've only got to look what happened to Dan Walker on his bike around that roundabout, and he was damn lucky. If he didn't have a helmet on, it could have been a lot worse. Well, I was sent an email with an article on, which is a bit of an eye-opener. I'll tell you what it is. Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. Hope you're doing all right. Let me know what you're up to in the comments and that you're having a good day. Well, we're nearly at the weekend again, aren't we? So all good here. Yes, 20-mile-an-hour speed limits. I mean, I live in a coastal town. We've got a lot of people that have, well, I suppose migrated down here from London, the big smoke. And it's been quite good for the area. They've bought money, they've opened businesses, and the place is thriving to an extent. But one of the things I've noticed is there are an awful lot of 20-mile-an-hour speed zones appearing here, there, and everywhere. I even saw one yesterday that caught me out. And of course, you get in the bigger cities, like London, as we've just mentioned, they're all over the show. But there is actually a plan to introduce them countrywide by 2026. There was a report done by the House of Lords, which came out in November, and that told us that this isn't really so much of a safety issue. They want to actually discourage drivers from using cars at all. They want to make it such a pain in the arse that we'll get out and get on our bike. Now, I was sent an article as well, which was quite interesting. I'll read that to you now. Okay, here we go. I'll take my eyes off you for a bit, and on the screen so you can hear this. This was done by a Nicholas Helen, transport editor, for the paper that this came out of. A default speed limit of 20 mile an hour would be introduced on new and redesigned urban and residential streets under planning guidelines. Other measures would challenge the century-long dominance of cars in built-up areas by creating a hierarchy that puts the needs of pedestrians and cyclists first. Sounds very 15-minute city-ish, doesn't it? Followed by public transport. Other motor traffic would be lower priority, with petrol and diesel vehicles last. A draft version of Manual for Streets, the planning document from the Department for Transport, says the default should be to work to a design speed limit of 20 miles an hour in urban environments. It adds that for residential streets, a maximum design speed of 20 miles an hour should normally be an objective, with significantly lower speeds usually desirable. Ministers have not yet seen the updated draft, which is due to be published early this year. A government response to a House of Lords report last year described the manual as the department's key piece of guidance on designing streets that put place above movement. It said the updated manual is likely to focus on an outcomes-based approach in which the street and all its users are considered holistically. A third of the population of England lives in areas where 20 mile an hour is the norm, but 30 mile an hour remains the national speed limit on single and dual carriageways with streetlights unless signs say otherwise. Typical stuff. The guidance would not create a new, lower national standard, but would make it easier for local authorities in England to set the 20 mile an hour as the limit. The Welsh Government will reduce speed limits from 30 to 20 on roads where cars mix with pedestrians and cyclists from September, while Scotland will make 20 mile an hour the norm for built-up areas, allowing councils to set exemptions if there is evidence it is safe. In England, Cornwall Council is the latest local authority to announce a county-wide limit of 20 mile an hour in residential areas to be phased in by 2026. In London, Wandsworth introduced a 20 mile an hour limit on all residential streets and the majority of classified roads last November. The proposed new guidelines were welcomed by Adrian Barrett, campaign manager for the 20s Planty campaign group, who said quite simply A speed limit of 20 mile an hour gives people what they want, places that are more livable. He said guidelines would remove complexity and costs for local authorities. Supporters of 20 mile an hour zones point out the safety benefits of lower speed limits. According to the Royal Society for the Prevention of Accidents, the risk of being fatally injured is 1.5% at 20 mile an hour compared to 8% at 30. Hell of a jump, isn't it? The cost of a fatality is estimated at £1.93 million. Injury in a serious collision £217,000, and injury in a slight collision £22,300. Taking into account loss of income, the cost of help from emergency services, insurance and legal support. Steve Gooding, director of the RAC Foundation, who is advising the Welsh Government on the implementation of its new rules, cautioned that the patchwork of different speed limits across England risks creating confusion for drivers. He said every single person who took their driving test in this country was taught it's 30 miles an hour in a built-up area. If you're going to change that, don't underestimate the extent to which you're going to have to make sure you've told them, whether by signs, advertising or news coverage. He pointed out that many drivers appear not to have changed their habits in the years since the Highway Code gave greater precedence to people walking and cycling. David Milner, Deputy Director of Create Streets, the Research and Advisory Institute, said for the past 70 years people have been guests in their own street, subservient to fast traffic. This design manual seems to be putting people, not vehicle, at its heart. There you go, folks. There's quite a lot to digest there, so you might want to listen to this back a couple of times. I'll put a link in the description to a source page with lots of different articles about this 20 mile an hour business, and you can check it out for yourself, but there's a lot there. I mean, somebody said that at the end of this, for the last 70 years, people have been guessing their own roads. How does a speed bump pull over a speeding motorist? Here's all I'm going to say. But it looks like this is the way it's going yet again, doesn't it? Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll see you with another one soon. Toodaloo.